Hey guys, I'm Joe, he's Nick, and you are entering into the combat zone, where, as Nick would say, the enemy has 4
things to say.
4, is your mic on, Nick?
No.
The enemy has 4 things to say.
I swear to God, I'm going to write this down.
Abandon ship, bail out, take cover, and I surrender.
And I surrender. I surrender, G.I. Joe. You remember this old show, Second City?
I remember. I was never
Second
a fan.
City,
but
they had this, it was a whole production. They had a...
SCTV, right?
Well, SCTV, yeah, that was the TV show, and but it was a whole production. I can't remember. I don't know where they were based originally, but they had, a theater, and there were a lot of comedians or comics that came from that particular show. Anyway, so they had their television show for a while, SCTV, Second City Television,
Right.
And I remember there was this one skit where they were doing like a war movie, and it was the Italian army, and they were doing maneuvers during World War II. So it was okay, everybody, 1, 2, 3, go, and then everybody threw down their rifles, put their hands up, and go, "We surrender, G.I. Joe." No disrespect to my Italian friends.
Actually,
our Italian friends.
It's like the French during World War II. They got a real bum rap. The problem with the Italian army was the army itself. It was its leadership, and it was the fact that there wasn't really the drive. Mussolini, the best they could say about him was he made the trains run on time. So he wasn't the kind of guy that you would follow through the gates of hell. I mean, he didn't have the charisma that Hitler did. He couldn't inspire the masses in the same way. So it's not surprising when you start the war fighting Ethiopians, riding camels with spears, using airplanes and bombs. It wasn't surprising he beat them in, I think it was in Abyssinia. He conquered that.
Abyssinia, which is modern-day Ethiopia.
Right. And, so, okay, you have that win under your belt, and then you start to encounter people who actually know what they're doing and have hardware equal to or better than yours, and suddenly things aren't going your way. Your heart's not really in it anyway.
So I just want to say that Nick and I were sitting out front of the
bunker,
the secret location bunker.
That's right.
And we were smoking pipes.
Yep.
Honest to God, guys, it was pipes. It was not. It was regular tobacco. There was nothing funny about it.
It wasn't wacky tobacco.
And we were talking about what we're going to talk about tonight, and this was not on the subject.
No, it isn't. Now, to be fair to the French too, I'm just reading Winston Churchill's 5-book treatise on World War II, and we're right at the part during the final days of France's resistance against the Germans. And the French army wasn't the issue. It was one guy called Pétain, who was a general in World War I, a hero, but by the time World War II rolled around, he was an old man, and he feared for what the Nazis would do to his country, and turned into their Benedict Arnold. Just not a very, it didn't end well for him. So I cut the French a lot of slack when it comes to the average Frenchman. They were very, very courageous around Dunkirk, and they were really up against an opponent that was, they simply outclassed them.
Okay. That said, our number to call if you want to join the conversation.
Yeah, that'd be a good idea.
Get on our cases for being insulting to Italians, even though we didn't really mean that.
That was all good fun.
Toll free anywhere in North America, 844-415-2115. That number again, 844-415-2115. And you can join us live by chat. You can send a message to Nick on Facebook, or you can click on the chat bubble in the live player if you're listening online, and you may have to register if you're not registered yet, but that's okay. It's free. Nobody uses the data. It's just to protect all of us, I guess, from those rogue lefty elements out there that. Nancy Pelosi. We don't want any Nancy Pelosi wannabes or
yes, we do. Yes, we do. That'd be fun.
Yes, we do. It'll make everything exciting.
You got that right.
I got it. Hey, Doug, and Doug's on the chat room already. Bad Doug, Doug was in the chat room, man, before we even started. It was sort of like he was waiting with his fingers above the keys.
And
on
he
his
says,
computer.
it's kind of quiet this evening. Am I doing something wrong? No, Doug, you're not doing anything
No, we're just
wrong.
getting started.
We're trying to drum up you some company is what we're trying to do.
Okay.
All right. Now, to get into the meat of the show, one of the things that you and I had talked about on the front porch of the bunker, just below the machine gun
What
post.
a great name for a new podcast.
The bunker.
No, on the front porch or from the front porch.
Well,
Isn't that a great idea?
I did a few called From the Kitchen Table. So, yeah, we could do that. From the porch. From the front porch.
From the front porch.
Our view of the world from the front porch or something like that, yeah.
Oh, that's an interesting idea.
Yeah, we'll have to kick that around.
Okay.
Anyway.
What do you think, Doug?
Yeah,
okay,
Doug.
we'll wait for your answer in the
Yeah,
chat room.
I'll keep an eye on the
Doug,
chat.
you could call us on the phone. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, by all means.
It's up to you.
What's the number?
844-415-2115.
There now, Doug.
See, I can
no
memorize
excuses.
that, but I can't memorize your introduction.
Yeah, it's funny how that works. I don't get it.
I don't know.
Anyway, we were talking about one of the things that we talked about, and I have a list of topics here in no particular order, so I don't have to be held accountable for.
Okay, let's jump in.
Okay, because we're going to get into Doug Ford's use of the notwithstanding clause, and I see two sides to this issue, and I know Joseph has a little bit different attitude about it. But we were talking about why is it so hard to get people engaged in the political realm? Most people, and because, look, when you're people like Joseph and I and others, let's call them political junkies. You know, we live and breathe this stuff. We pay attention to the news. We read the stories and analyze them to death. You know, then we go on Facebook and share our pearls of wisdom. And, you know, okay,
or in the combat zone.
Or we do it in the combat zone. What I'm trying to say is that, you know, we tear this stuff apart. But the vast majority of Canadians couldn't care less.
I don't know if it's that they don't care. It's
just so low on the priority list.
Well, this is it. I mean, people are busy. You know, Nick, they've got their families. They've got they're paying their bills. You know, they're looking after their homes and their affairs. It's I mean, people are busy. And look, you know, you reach a stage in your life where there's a certain what's the word I'm looking for? Modus vivendi. Okay, where you're just living your life. You get up in the morning, you do your business. You go to work, you come home, you go to bed at night. It's a pattern,
yeah.
and unless something breaks into that pattern that really upsets your equilibrium. That's a good word to use. We all have a certain equilibrium that we reach, and unless something breaks that equilibrium, I don't think people, you know, they really think about it that much. You know, this is the thing about polling, for instance, okay? There's lots of opinion polls out there, and people, you know, come up with a question, right? I don't know, are taxes too high? Okay, well, you know, the truth is, if you were to poll people and ask them, are your taxes too high, or better yet, would you like to see your taxes lower? You know, most people are going to go, yeah, I'd like to see my taxes lower.
Right.
But if you give them an open-ended question and say, give me the top 10 issues in your mind that bother you or that concern you, taxes will not be at the top of that. They may not even be in the list at all of top 10 issues for most people, because it doesn't hurt them. They've reached an equilibrium. They work, they get their paychecks, their taxes are deducted, they make fill out a tax return at the end of the year. Hopefully they get a refund. It's a pattern, and nobody is in any kind of acute pain. So if you're in pain, if something interjects into that equilibrium that bothers you, then you're going to pay attention to it. But you know, the typical macro sort of economic stuff. Oh, unemployment is an issue. You know, let's say unemployment, is at 10%, which it's not. But let's say unemployment is at 10%, which
right.
is, you know, starting to get fairly high. You know, if you think about it, that's a problem for the country. That's a problem for the economy.
Right.
But if you're not unemployed, okay,
how much does it matter to you?
It doesn't matter that much to you. So a lot of the things that people get bothered by that would impel them to get involved in the political process, in the democratic process, more actively, more attentively, they just don't occur.
Okay.
Now, don't plow their roads properly in the wintertime.
Now they care.
That's an issue.
Don't pick the garbage up when you're supposed
now
to.
I'm upset.
That's right.
Okay.
Because I can't get to work.
Or whatever, okay? Potholes in the road.
Yep.
Little things like that.
It's always the little grain of sand that gets your attention, right?
And you never know what it is.
Well, this is why, the most important level of governance is always municipal, all politics are local, and a good councillor, good city councillor, will keep his ear to the ground to find out what the issues are in his ward. And that way he can stay plugged in and know what's going on in his own backyard. The higher that you go in politics, the sexier the profile, the portfolios are, but the less meaningful they are in everyday life. Like, I would love to be Minister of Defense, okay, because I care passionately about the military. But how much does that cross the mind of the average voter on, Monday to Friday? Unless something dramatic happens, like, a ship sinks at sea and we lose some sailors or stuff like that, it'll be in the news cycle 48 hours, maybe 72, maybe a little bit longer. But after a certain period of time, it's over. I remember telling some of the senior leadership that I knew of, that I knew in the military during the Afghan war, I said, guys, enjoy this golden era right now. I mean, yes, it's a mess in Afghanistan, and, my heart goes out to the families of the people that were losing. But right now, you have the attention of the Canadian population, and if you want to make any hay, now's the time to do it. And those days are now gone. People have gone back to the way that it was before the war. That, yes, they care about the troops to a certain degree, and they want to see them get what they need through PTSD counseling and so on. But for the most part, they're not going to go for. They're not interested in buying the right airplane or buying the right ship. It's just not part of their daily lexicon. I should mention, Doug is saying that he doesn't have any sound. So I just thought I'd throw that over to you because you're our tech guy. I don't know what that means, but
I don't know what that means either.
He says the little yellow line is not yellow.
I don't know.
It's supposed to be.
Everything's working on our side.
Okay, well, I don't know what to tell you, Doug, but we'll keep an eye on it and see what the story is there.
Yeah, and if anyone else is experiencing that, send us a note on the chat room or whatever. But I don't see a problem on our side here, so maybe it's a problem on your side, Doug. I do not know.
But we will do our best to stay on top of it. Anyway, so it's because it's not a daily irritant. Let's say if you look at the mess here in the city of Ottawa. For those of you who are outside the city of Ottawa and aren't paying attention, we're doing this LRT thing, the light rail, and it is a total
fiasco.
Yes,
boondoggle?
Much better phrase than the one I was going to use.
You were going to call it what? FUBAR.
Yes, that's an acronym. That's another acronym. I had something a little ruder in mind, but I won't share it.
FUBAR can be pretty rude when you actually know what it stands for.
Yeah, snafu's not that nice either. Anyway,
for those of you who don't know,
mess.
FUBAR stands for Fruited Up Beyond All Recognition.
I like that. That's one I haven't quite heard before.
Right.
Anyway, the point is that this is becoming a real nightmare here in Ottawa. That now it's going to be at least a year late. The first target was our 105th anniversary. That didn't happen. Then it was this fall. That didn't happen. Now it's going to be next year. So these things, because of the impact it has on transit within the city, affects literally tens of thousands of people. And those are the kind of things that drive people crazy and make them pay attention.
Right.
But
yes.
unless you can find something, like one of the other topics I wanted to bring up was the idea that we're losing our right to free speech. Our history is being erased. Statues are being taken down of nationally significant, historically significant national figures. Sir John A. Macdonald, Lord Edward Cornwallis are just two examples where they've been removed because they offend modern political sensibilities, right? Like that should have anything to do with it. And yet people, they'll express outrage on call-in shows and to letters to the editor, but will they go down and counter-protest? Will they put their money together to buy a new statue and stick up two of them where there once was one? and to show the people who took it down or demanded it to be removed that we won't stand for this.
Right.
They're not willing to do that.
Well, part of the thing is, Margaret Thatcher tried to address this as well at one point in time when she was asked her opinion of why, for instance, voter turnout was so low. And in her day, voter turnout was not as low as it is today.
Right.
So low voter turnout in elections in Margaret Thatcher's day, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but my guess would be, low 70s, high 60s, maybe mid 60s percentage of voters actually going out and casting a ballot.
Right.
Today, it's not unusual in a federal election for the voter turnout to be somewhere in the order of, 50 to 55%. And in municipal elections, it's abysmal. It's in the 30s, if you can get that high. In some ward races in municipal elections, the voter turnout is actually in the 20s. So, when you think of that's 20, let's say 25% of the actual, that's voter turnout. So that's actual eligible voters.
Right. That's
not even people who are, that are, otherwise would be qualified to vote. That's actual people who are on the voters list. So, it's only a very small percentage. In some of these municipal elections, you're really, the government is really only being elected, Nick, by 10, maybe 15% of the population altogether. So, in that atmosphere, it's very easy for special interest groups to take control of the political agenda, and they do. And it's easy for them to do it at the municipal level, not as easy to do at the federal level because there are more voters. But still, when you're talking 50 or 55% voter turnout, that's pretty low. The question is, why? And I started out saying, what Margaret Thatcher sort of jumped into this a little bit, and her idea was that part of the problem was that everything, there was just too much politics. Everything was political. The issues when she first ran for public office, not long after the Second World War, were big issues, and politics didn't impact or didn't intervene in most of the little things around you. But today, it's all politics all the time. So at some point in time, you just tune it out, and you don't tune it out purposely. It's just that it's there all the time. So what used to be, we're having an election, there are 3 or 4 big issues. We need to think about this, talk about it, decide about it. Now it's hundreds of little issues. We were talking earlier on this evening, whether or not you can cut the grass, how high your grass should be cut,
when,
literally, or when. I mean, there are. It's a political issue because there are bylaws at the municipal level. There are bylaws about whether or not you have to cut the grass in front of your property, and how often. And once you start getting into that, then it's not just how often, but how low you have to cut the grass. Can you get rid of the weeds using weed killer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What color I'm going to paint my garage door has been an issue that they've had to pass bylaws around in certain neighborhoods for certain neighborhoods. It's all politics all the time. And so eventually what ends up happening is if the issue doesn't really impact you, like can't get out of my laneway because they're not plowing the roads when it snows, or I happen to be one of those people that has a purple garage door and my neighbors want me to have a brown garage door because everybody else's garage door is brown. I'm making that up, by the way. I don't have a purple garage door. But, if eventually, unless it impacts you directly, and not just impacts you, but impacts you in a meaningful way, that there's real pain involved, then you're not going to care because you're busy doing other things. And this is part of the problem. Another part of the problem, while we're on the subject, is that when it comes to, pardon me, a little bit of a cough there, when it comes to spending money, so much of what the government spends money on for special interests, the money that the government spends on special interests is very large, but the tax burden is spread out so widely that individuals who don't agree with the policy it doesn't hurt them that much. It doesn't interfere in their day-to-day lives, and they're only paying a little bit of the tax that they pay goes towards that. So it's you spread out the cost widely enough that it really doesn't bother people that much. So really, you're asking, why don't people care? Why don't they get more involved? Well, getting involved takes effort.
Yeah.
It takes effort, and, I would guess that most people really believe that they can't bring about change, that their contribution, whether it's financial or it's physical, as in going out and marching or writing letters to the editor or calling into a talk show,
yes,
which takes an effort, they don't feel that effort is going to yield results. So there's a certain element of what's the point, okay? And especially because the pain that's being inflicted on me as a result of the things that I disagree with, it's not at the threshold. It hasn't passed that threshold yet where it's really hurting me emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, financially, whatever, okay? Yeah. And so people are just not motivated. And I understand it. I completely understand.
Well, life is busy enough. And I get your point. Your point is well taken about when Margaret Thatcher first ran for office. Politics didn't infect every aspect of life. People just learned to get along. They had, that old saying, good fences make good neighbors, was more than just a cute little saying. It was an actual policy that, there were unwritten rules about how you dealt with fences between neighbors. And that made sure that, you could get along with the guy next to you. Even if you didn't like the guy and he didn't like you, at least you could, come to some kind of agreement about how to each live your own lives. The government gets involved, lays down a whole bunch of rules and laws that most people don't agree with, don't understand, and never asked for in the first place. And we see this in the property rights side of things all the time. The government coming onto somebody's private property and telling them how to manage it. Okay, well, to the guy where that doesn't happen to, they just go, well, sucks to be you. But to the guy it happens to, it matters a lot. So it all depends on what the issue is, and it all depends on the kind of pain and there are some people, when we say nobody cares, that's a broad saying. There are a lot of people out there who do care passionately, but it's not enough to actually make a difference. Even if you had a protest during the Wind Days, as an example, during her reign, of 10,000 people showing up down at the legislature, complaining about or protesting the same-sex, sex ed curriculum, okay? She'd look out the window and say, look, I had more people vote for me in my own riding than that. What do I care? It would have to be 150 or 200,000 people before it would have any impact. And Canadians are notorious at not doing that. The Americans, a million-man march, they can come up with the people. The Americans, and they just have a completely different understanding of how to engage in the political theater, and it's almost like a blood sport down there by comparison to the way that we do it.
Almost literally these days.
Yeah, no kidding. But the point I'm making is that I think that one of the biggest challenges we have is Canadians are so laid back in a lot of ways that it's like they sleepwalk through some of the most, egregious assaults on their freedoms without ever going anything more than, that kind of sucks, but I can still drive my car, I can still go to the cottage, I can still go fishing, I can still do this, I can still do that. And the day they can't, it's too late.
Well, yeah, and I think that, you touched on an important point when you talked about property rights and, not getting directly into property rights per se. I think that one of the things that we've had that's happened in our country and in Western countries in general, but in our country in particular, in Canada, is that we have, as individuals, we have passed our obligation to deal with our neighbor onto the government.
Absolutely.
So what used to be a situation where, if let's talk about, garbage in the front yard. So I own a home, you own a home, Nick, and I don't look after my property. I've got garbage all over the place. I've got a rundown, a broken down car in the driveway. I don't cut the grass. I don't maintain the property. And the consequence of that to you, who is, looking after your property, maintaining it, keeping everything clean, neat, tidy, is that the value of your property is actually going to go down. So
right.
You are suffering a tangible, what's the word I'm looking for?
Impediment,
damage,
damage,
a real damage.
Yes, damage.
You're suffering real damage. Now, at one point in time, traditionally, not just at one point in time, but overall, traditionally, the responsibility to deal with that rested with you having to deal directly with me. And if we disputed that, then we could litigate it. We could go to an arbitrator.
That's
we
what
could go to
courts
court. This is what a civil action is all about. So, you come and you take me to court and you say, I'm suffering a real damage because of this. And the court could order me to clean things up or to pay damages or whatever. And but now we don't want to do that. So people don't want to do that. So what they've done is they've made the situation where the government now passes a law. And now instead of you coming to me and saying, neighbor, okay, is there something I can do to help keep this property clean, your property clean? Maybe I can lend a hand. Maybe, I could get one of my 8 or 9 children to lend a hand.
Try and work it out, yeah.
Okay, let's work this out. And in the event that we can't work it out, then, if we have to confront one another in court, then that's what we'll do, okay? But instead of doing any of that now, what we do is we pick up the phone and we call the bylaw enforcement.
That's right.
We've made it a state responsibility.
We've made
and
them
I
a
think
bully.
That's a huge mistake. It's a huge problem because it adds to the regulations and the laws under which we have to abide. And now most people don't find themselves in this confrontational, conflictual situation. So they don't care. They don't realize that it's a problem.
Well, even when they do, they don't want. Most people do not like confrontation. So if you have a problem, let's say you and I are neighbors and I'm a slob, and you come over to me and say, look, Nick.
By the way, sorry to interrupt, Nick, but I just want to make clear that this is all very hypothetical. Okay. First of all, we aren't neighbors. And second of all,
well, in a
I'm
very
not a slob.
extended, worldly kind of way, I suppose.
And you're not a slob either, Nick.
Yeah, well, I was using that as an example.
I understood, but
Yes.
I just wanted to make that clear.
Okay. But the point I'm making is that you come over and say, look, let's see what we can do to work this out, and try to come to some agreement. Maybe there's a reason. And this is what most people don't consider. Maybe there's a reason. Maybe there's health issues in the home where they can't. Or their time is they don't have the time because they're trying to look after somebody who's ill, has to go for treatments 2 or 3 times a week, and then they have a job to keep, and they just, there's just not enough time in the day to look after, and whether the grass gets cut or not is mighty low on the priority. So if you go to them and say, look, what's the story? I'm not trying to be difficult to live with. And if I can help, let me do that. They're afraid that they're going to get into a verbal shouting match and everything's going to go down. And maybe it will. But that's what the courts are for, to keep people from getting into fistfights over how high the grass gets.
Right. So what we've done is we've made it a matter of the law.
Yeah. We've turned
passed laws.
The laws into bullies. We've turned our municipal governments into bullies.
Yes, we have. Absolutely. That's exactly the case. But it's not something that the government... It's not something the government did to us. It's something that we, the people, did to ourselves. Okay, the government didn't. Nobody ran on a platform of, okay, elect me, and I'm going to pass all of these laws, making sure that your neighbors are not going to make noise at night. And so, and here's the thing that really drives me crazy. We're coming to the bottom of the hour, so we're going to take a break in a second, in a minute, Nick, but. This really drives me crazy. The idea that because it's legal, it's right, it's okay. Or what makes it not okay is that it's illegal. And, it's such an important thing. I told my kids this all the time. There's a world of difference between right and wrong and legal and illegal. So the standard of behavior is not what's legal and illegal. The standard of behavior that I believe you have to follow is what's right and what's wrong. What's decent, what's not decent, what's neighborly, and what's not neighborly. And I don't care what the bylaw is. I don't care what the law allows me to do. I don't care what the law doesn't allow me to do. If I'm doing something that's irritating my neighbor, okay, and he or she comes to me and says, can you please stop that? Like maybe I have a party going, and there's noise in the backyard, and it's 8 p.m. And somebody comes and says, "Listen, can you turn the noise down a little bit?" It's. I know so many people today are going to say, "Well, no, I don't have to turn the noise down because the bylaw says I don't have to turn the noise down till whatever it is, 9 or 9:30 p.m. So I'm not doing anything wrong." But the proper reaction should be, turn the noise down. Okay, maybe the next door neighbors want to call it a night early. You can still have a party. Try to be
reasonable.
A good neighbor.
Yeah. Maybe there's little kids they're trying to put to bed, or who knows what.
Okay, well, so we're coming up on the bottom of the hour.
Yep.
And, boy, that first half hour really passed fast. I can't believe it.
There's so much we've got to get into.
I know. We're not going to be able to finish it all. This is going to be normal. Okay, we're going to take a break. We're going to be back in a couple of minutes, so stay tuned. Okay, we are back, and Nick is just sitting here opening up an apple cider. And, it's low alcohol. We're not drinking too much here. I just want to make sure that people understand that. That's Nick laughing in the background. And I don't even know if he's got his mic on. No, he's just laughing without his mic. It's an evil laugh. It's an evil laugh. There we go.
There we are.
Okay. Where were we?
We were just getting ready because we were talking about, let's see, why people are so hard to motivate when it comes to politics. And I thought because there's so much, okay, let's do this because I do want to get to Ford. That's the raging topic right now. But there's another topic I think is important as well. And that is our good friend Mad Max Bernier, who is, I don't know where he got the idea, but he's going to be announcing the party logo or unveiling the party logo and letting us know what he's going to call his new party this coming Friday. Now, for those of us in the news business, anybody knows, anyone in the news business would know that Friday is the worst day of the week to make any kind of major announcement because come Monday, everybody will have forgotten. And you still have the ripple effect of what Doug Ford is doing. So it would have been better to wait till Monday.
Right, plus Hurricane Florence.
There's all kinds of things that are going to come along to wash this story off the front page.
And it's hard to get to the front page when you've got, all of the dealings with Donald Trump and
our good friend Mr. Trudeau, you name it. There's all kinds of reasons. Like if he wants to have some kind of impact, Friday's not the day to do it. Monday, maybe Tuesday. Anyway, as
a rule, you're not wrong. As a rule, if you want to be in the news cycle, you have to allow for a cycle after you've made your announcements, okay? And Friday is not the best day to be making announcements because the weekend kills it's a different news cycle altogether. So I agree with you, but look, I'm not going to throw stones at him. He has some ideas in his head, and here this is. I am resolved from this point on. Okay, see, watch list. You see, Nick. There's my
hand over your heart.
My heart. My right hand is.
You're taking an oath.
Okay, I'm taking an oath. I am no longer going to call Maxime Bernier Mad Max because it's not fair to him. Okay, he's. he's different. He's a different kind of politician.
You got that right.
For sure. And is it good? Is it bad? I think that's a subjective thing. I think he brings a lot to the table. He's shaking things up. It's unfortunate because I think that Max Bernier starting a new political party on the right is going to have a negative electoral impact on the Conservative Party of Canada and the leader. Oh my goodness
You mean
gracious.
who?
Andrew Scheer.
Yes.
Yeah. By the way, if Andrew's listening or any of Andrew's friends, that was totally not on purpose. His name just slipped my mind there for a second. So apologies to Andrew. I certainly didn't mean anything by that. But look, the reality is it's going to have an impact. It's going to hurt. It's going to hurt the Conservative Party. It's going to hurt Andrew Scheer. But is it good for the country? I don't know. We'll have to see. It's going to be interesting.
I think, from what I understand, look, Maxine, whether you agree with his policies or not, is not one to back down from a fight. He, in his mind, as I understand it, he was dealt a pretty rough set of cards by Andrew Scheer. And he's not the only politician who could make that claim. Let's not forget that Andrew Scheer came within a whisker of being who Andrew Scheer is now, the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. So
Maxime came within a whisker of beating him.
That's yes,
right. Okay,
yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, that wasn't very well said. But the point is that when you have someone who fought that well and put on, brought that kind of support to the table, you don't ignore them. You give them a prominent seat. You give them a prominent role, and you say, look, we're in this together, and you build a coalition between you and him. And you could say the same thing about Brad Trust. Instead of treating them like pariahs in the party, what goes on behind party doors when they're in caucus or when they're having their meetings, that's, what happens in that room stays in that room. And that way, that's when they can hammer it out and yell and scream at each other and call each other all the names they want to. But you got to come out of that room united. And for some reason, Mr. Scheer has not been able to pull that off. Mr. Harper did when he was Prime Minister, because Maxime Bernier was part of Mr. Harper's government, and he managed to keep Andrew within the fold. Now, Maxime in the fold. Andrew needs to understand that in order to stand a chance of beating Justin Trudeau, and make no mistake, I don't think there's going to be this massive tidal wave that's going to wipe the Liberals out like they did here in Ontario. I'd love to see it, but I don't think that's in the cards. I think despite everything, because people are the way that you and I were talking about beforehand, they only pay attention the last week or so of an election. And as long as there's some slick marketing out there by the Liberals, it's going to be a real dogfight. So now, because Andrew Scheer was not able to keep Maxime Bernier in the party, he's created a new demon that didn't have to be there. And that is a problem of leadership.
Yeah, I'm going to give Andrew, a bit of a pass on this, a bit of a pass here. I think you're right. Ultimately, this is a question of leadership, and somehow or other, unless Bernier was bound and determined that he was going to move on, and I don't believe that was the case, but if it was, then, obviously there's little or nothing that Andrew Scheer could have done in order to keep Bernier in the fold. I don't have that impression, though. I think that there wasn't enough give and take. There wasn't enough effort put into making Bernier feel that his ideas and his supporters, his followers, had a comfortable welcome home in the Conservative Party. Quite the opposite. The impression I got was that whenever Bernier would say something that was somewhat challenging to the status quo thinking, that the party, if not Scheer, then his supporters, his surrogates, if you will, were very quick to pounce on Bernier, call him disloyal, whatever, basically just being nasty. And that's just not a way to build a political coalition. And, it's really important when you're on the conservative side of the political spectrum in this country. It's really important to find ways to build those coalitions. You're not going to get everybody that's going to agree ideologically. And as Andrew Scheer himself says, look, I prefer to focus on the things that we agree on and rather than the things we disagree on. And as a principle, that's not a bad approach to things. But the reality is that you still have to deal with the things that you don't agree with. I mean, that's the reality. And I just don't think he did a very good job of it. I think he could have done a better job.
Yeah. And I think that what's going to happen, unless there's a last-minute Hail Mary pass that brings Maxine back into the fold, and I cannot imagine what that would be. I think that they've gone too far now, that whatever internal damage has been done. And at this point, at least, it's irreparable. Maybe down the road, they could do a merger like the old Reform and the PC Party did. But right now, I think the wounds are too fresh and everything is too recent. And they're just not going to be able to bring him back in the fold. So the question becomes then, what's more important? Here's the problem I have with a lot of people who, it's the same thing when Patrick Brown was running. And I see some similarities between the two situations. People would support Patrick Brown even though they didn't like him, even though they didn't like a lot of things he stood for. And some very prominent people did. And said, look, we've got to get rid of Kathleen Wynne. Yes, we do, but if we get someone who agrees with all the policies, just changing the color of the flag doesn't get us anywhere. So now if you look over on the federal side, we have people out there, like if you look at, there are some clear differences between the conservatives and the liberals on the federal side. Immigration is one of them. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt. Energy is another. But when you talk about, let's say, climate change, okay, what's the difference between the two parties? They both want to do the same thing. There are some pretty significant similarities, too. So when people look at the two parties, they're not going to see enough of a difference, I think, to make that leap. And with Maxime Bernier out there saying, look, guys, we have to rethink a lot of this stuff and come at it from a real conservative point of view. A lot of people are going to get attracted to that, and they're going to back that. And it's going to hurt the Conservative Party of Canada big time.
I don't doubt that you're wrong, Nick. I agree. I think that your assessment is absolutely correct. I think that there are too many similarities. I think that the Conservative Party of Canada under Andrew Scheer's leadership, while it's different, I don't think that it's different enough
That's my
to
point too.
really motivate people to get out there and vote. And I just don't think that the general population is as unhappy with Justin Trudeau as conservative partisans are. And so I just don't see this wave, this blue wave. So in that respect, I think that what Maxime is doing is the harm that's going to accrue to the Conservative Party of Canada is going to be magnified for that very reason.
I think there is one thing that will drive people into the arms of conservatives, no matter what happens between Andrew Scheer and Maxime Bernier. If we can't get an NAFTA deal and we lose thousands of jobs because Trudeau and his gang couldn't get a deal done, the big sticking point is supply management. And I did a little homework. Do you know how much market share the Americans are looking for? And this is what the whole thing's hung up over. Right now, they have about 3.75%, if my memory serves me correctly, and I stand to be corrected. But they want 10. That's it. 10% market share.
Or the ability to have 10% market share. I don't know what the numbers are, Nick, but here's the thing. Okay, if we don't get a NAFTA agreement, I don't believe that the majority of Canadians are going to blame Justin Trudeau for that. And I doubt that they're going to punish him for it.
You think they're going to blame Trump?
I think they'll blame Trump. I really do. I think they'll blame Trump. I think that's the narrative. I think that's what the Liberals are going to say. And, you know, there's probably an element of truth to it. So, you know, I'm not going to
Trump's job to look after Canada.
No, I understand that. But when you're dealing with somebody who doesn't necessarily want to do a deal, I mean, here's the thing, okay? What choice does Justin Trudeau have? People go, okay, well, you're mismanaging the file. I can't believe I'm defending the guy, okay? But in fairness...
Neither can I, but go ahead.
But in fairness, okay, what is he supposed to do? Let's say the Americans demand unequivocally no room for compromise. We want access to 10% of your dairy market. Without that, there is no deal. What choice does Trudeau have? He's got to say yes. So if he tries to negotiate, which people are saying, well, you bungled the negotiations, okay? Well, how do you negotiate when you don't have any leverage?
Well, the reason he doesn't have any leverage is because he was an idiot and walked out of a press conference and knifed the President of the United States in the back. That's why he doesn't have any leverage.
Yeah.
Why? And look, this is down in the weeds stuff. This is what most people don't pay attention to.
Right.
I get that, okay? But at the same time, and you're probably right, okay? Because what I have never been able to get my head around is why Canadians, first of all, care so much about American politics, other than the fact that it affects our economy so much. I get that part. But generally, we don't vote down there. Generally, we don't pay taxes down there. We have no say over who the president's going to be. So it's like screaming at the rain. You can scream all you want. It isn't going to change anything.
Yeah, well, I can tell you why it is. It's because our media is so dominated by American politics. And here's the thing. I will say this. If I have something to throw stones at Justin Trudeau over, it's this darned notion that we're going to protect our culture. There's no way we're going to allow American interests to take over the Canadian newspapers, Canadian broadcast networks, okay? And I heard that a couple of weeks ago. And, you know, really, figuratively speaking, I almost fell off my chair. Because for two reasons. The first reason is Canadians watch American television.
That's right.
Okay? They watch CNN. They watch Fox News. They watch MSNBC. You know, we could come back to the old argument that here I am in Canada. I want to watch the Grey Cup game, the football championship for the CFL. I can't get it on basic cable. I have to have one of the specialty channels, okay? But I can watch the Super Bowl for free on cable. I mean, well, I could watch it for free anyway. I could put up an antenna and I could get it for free on Canadian television stations.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So the first thing is Canadians watch American television for starters.
Whether we like it or not, yep.
But here's the kicker. Canadian stations broadcast American programs. Okay? And even if they're not broadcasting American programs, if I turn on the CBC,
right?
Hey, I was sitting in the dentist chair this afternoon. Okay, sorry to reveal this to all of the people who think I was having my dentures fixed. Yes, I have dentures. Okay, so I'm sitting in the dentist chair and he's adjusting the dentures and stuff like that. What's on television? CTV Newsnet.
Right.
Okay? What's the main story? What's all they're talking about? Donald Trump, New York Times, who wrote the op-ed, it's Donald Trump all the time. It's American politics all the time. And so who cares who owns CTV? Who cares who owns the CBC? Who cares? All the Canadian stations do is report American politics. So is it any wonder that Canadians are more interested in American politics? Canadians know more about the political process in the United States
Than they do about their own.
do about the process here in Canada.
Yeah.
But don't blame Donald Trump for that. And it has nothing to do with ownership. And it has nothing to do with Canadian content requirements. Because none of that comes into play when it comes to the CBC and what news stories they choose
And
to
they're
broadcast.
some of the worst when it comes to bashing American politicians, in this case specifically, because it was like that
in
with
particular
Bush.
Donald Trump.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's a pastime for these guys. It's a hobby.
It's just ridiculous. Every time you turn, I catch myself thinking when I'm listening to either radio or, I almost never watch TV, but whenever I do, is this the only thing in the universe? Is there nothing going on in Myanmar? Is there nothing going on in Iceland? Is there nothing going on in the Northwest Territories? Where are the other stories?
Well, there are other stories.
I know, that's the point.
There are, and they do report on the other stories. But in a 15-minute news broadcast,
14 and a half are about
minutes
Donald
is
Trump.
U.S. politics, and the rest is Canadian politics.
Yeah, which takes up about 30 seconds out of a 15-minute broadcast.
I'm probably exaggerating a little bit, but it's predominantly American politics.
It's just so frustrating because you know what, when you care about your country, and I certainly do, some would say almost too much, that you look around and you watch people think, there's a certain hardcore group who are like you. They when I say you, I'm talking about the royal you. They care passionately when people take down statues of Sir John A., as an example. But in general, most people just don't care. They don't know anything about our history. They don't know anything about our culture. They don't even know they can't. All they can say about our culture is we're not American.
And nobody was talking about taking down statues of Sir John A. Macdonald until they started talking about taking down statues of Robert E. Lee in the United States.
Precisely. Yes.
So again, there's this notion that we are independent thinkers and all that stuff, but really, all these guys are just lemmings, not lemons.
It's like the bumper sticker.
They are lemons, but they're lemmings too.
Yes, it's like the bumper sticker I have on the back of my truck. It says, "All you nonconformists are all the same."
And they really are.
Yeah, that's the point.
They really are. They don't realize it. But.
Yeah, they're trying so hard to be different that they all end up being the same. And it's just one of these things. It's enough. It's enough to make you weep because you're sick and tired of seeing this happen. So that was part of the catalyst of why we started this particular radio broadcast in the first place, was to try in some small way to begin to interest people in what's going on, not only in their own backyard, but outside of this stuff. We talk about this stuff too, but outside of this stuff, like one of the stories I have is out of the EU. The EU wants to punish Hungary because Hungary won't play the immigration game. Okay, and Viktor Orban, Prime Minister of Hungary, is saying, you guys are picking on us, trying to make us an example because we don't want your immigrant problem. And they have, the lowest number of issues of any European country other than maybe Poland, and Poland is being punished as well because they won't play that game.
Well, the thing about Europe that it's really starting to percolate now, and that is that the people in individual countries are getting tired of Brussels, that is to say the EU bureaucrats, telling them what to do. And that played a significant role in the British voting in a referendum to leave the EU. And that's a scenario that hasn't played out yet. I don't know what the ultimate result is going to be in that whole drama. But there is, as you know, I just spent 2 weeks there.
Yep.
And not 2 weeks, visiting museums, but 2 weeks talking to people and talking to political people and stuff like that. And there's a real undercurrent of unhappiness with the almost dictatorial powers of the EU, and they kind of are bullies when it comes to this kind of stuff. And unfortunately, I think that you're going to start to see more of this playing out on the immigration file, where people in the various countries are starting to say, we're German, we're French, we're
Swedish,
Danish. Although I'm not sure if Sweden's a member of the EU,
I don't know.
but Polish, Czech,
Yep.
we Austrian. Okay, we get to decide what the law is in our country. But so much of what the EU does is it superimposes rules and laws, and so it's a whole layer of bureaucracy that's even further disconnected from the population. And there's a very real current of unhappiness just underneath the surface, waiting to.
And you don't have to scratch very far.
No, you don't have to scratch very far.
No, Nigel Farage has made a 20-year career out of getting England or the UK out of the EU because, as he sees it, it's nothing but an excuse by Brussels to trample all over nation-state rights. One of the things that bothered me almost from day one about Justin Trudeau was when he said, I'm the first post-national Prime Minister.
Yeah, first Canada. Yeah, he said, I don't know. He said that Canada is the first post-nation state.
What the hell is that?
Well, he's factually wrong. The truth is that, all I have to do is look at the UK. The United Kingdom
thought Belgium
is not even a national. It's not a nation state. Belgium. Good point. Belgium is not a nation state. It's
I don't think. Do they
state.
Do they have a functioning government in Belgium?
They do, sure. And it's bilingual, interestingly enough. Belgium is a bilingual country. But England is, we say England, but it's the United Kingdom. And the United Kingdom is actually made up of England,
right,
which is English.
Right.
Wales,
yes,
which is, Welsh. And guess what? They speak Welsh in Wales.
That's right.
Okay. Everybody speaks English, by the way, okay? But people speak Welsh in Wales, Scotland, and Ireland. So those are four very Northern Ireland, I should say.
Yeah.
Those are four very distinct nationalities. So the United Kingdom, it's Great Britain and Northern Ireland, is a post-nation state. It's never been a nation state, so when Justin Trudeau said that, it was really a profoundly ignorant thing to say. Clearly, he doesn't understand how these different countries have come together. Well, Austria-Hungary, for pity's sake, for hundreds of years.
That's right. The Auto-Hungarian Empire.
A multinational state, because not only was it Austria and Hungary, but a lot of there were the Czechs, the Slovaks, the Bosnians, the Serbs. I could go on and on and on. We're part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So it's and even Italy. Italy. We talk about Italians, but the truth is that Italy is not really a nation state. There's no real Italian nationality. Okay, there's the
Corsicans, the Sicilians.
And up north around the Alps, and it's really. It was such a silly thing for him to say.
Well, I don't think. Yes, it was silly, but I don't think what he was trying to say was we are the first global nation. Like this whole idea of, and I hate to sound conspiratorial, but the one world order, where the UN is in charge of everything, and he was surrendering our sovereignty to the United Nations, which I have a huge problem with.
Okay, let's get into that when we come back after this break.
Okay. Okay, welcome back. Thanks for staying with us, folks, to the Combat Zone. I'm Nick. He's Joseph, and this is the only place. This is one of those places where the enemy has nothing to say but take cover, abandon ship, bail out, and I surrender. All right. Joseph and I had quite the conversation going, and we were. I don't want to go down the conspiratorial. I don't believe in conspiracies as a rule. Mostly because of the old saying, don't consign to conspiracy things that can be explained by stupidity. So there's a lot of different conspiracies out there. Pick your favorite. I once did a show based on conspiracy theories. You know, who shot John F. K? Did Elvis really die? Da-da-da-da-da. And it was one of the wildest shows I've ever done. You wouldn't believe some of the stuff.
Did we actually land on the moon?
Yeah, that was another one.
I saw a news story about that recently.
Yeah?
Yeah.
They finally confirmed we actually did land on the moon?
No. I think Buzz Aldrin, who was one of the astronauts that landed on the moon, now is saying it was a conspiracy. We didn't really... in fairness, I don't know that he's actually saying that. I read the headline. So maybe he's.
We all
saying
know
something
how
totally
reliable
different.
headlines are.
Yeah.
But
CNN headline news.
That's a reliable source. You know, it's funny. I was looking on Twitter earlier. Yes, I have
we've got
a Twitter
to talk
account.
about that. Nick is finally joined
The 19th century.
Well, the 21st century, Nick. The 21st century.
Oh, right. When I moved up to smoke signals, that's when I joined the 19th century.
Nick is now on Twitter.
Yes, I am. And
So
if you'd like, you can follow me at N. Vandergraat.
You better spell that.
At A-T. Oh, the at sign.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean the name? Oh.
Yes, we all understand. Okay, so I know this is going to be a surprise to you, Nick, but we all understand the at when it comes to
The at sign.
Twitter or at,
Right. Okay.
emails and stuff like that.
It's at N. Vandergraat, VANDERGRAGT.
So I'm gonna get Nick. I'll show Nick how to put that up on Facebook and all those things. So you guys out there, make sure that you follow Nick.
Now, you have a Twitter account,
and
too. Don't be so
I
shy.
do. I'm not shy.
Okay.
I'm not shy at all.
Okay, good.
So
Anyway, the point is, I finally, I get dragged kicking and screaming into technology. Like it took me forever to get a cell phone. I just didn't see the need for one. And finally, when I was still on terrestrial radio, my boss said, "You got to go out and cover a particular." It was Lawrence Cannon out in way the heck out in Quebec somewhere.
somewhere in the Pontiac area, and we're not talking about the car.
No, we're not talking about the car. I have actually owned a couple of Pontiacs, but not there. Anyway, Lawrence Cannon was got defeated that night. Anyway, and it wasn't because I was covering him, but I also covered Eli L. Chanturi and people like that when they got elected. And he said, take your cell phone and get him on the air as soon as the announcement's made that he's won. I said, I don't have a cell phone. And he looked at me like I had three heads. He said, you're in the broadcast business and you don't have a cell phone? I said, I never needed one. I said, if I have one, people can get a hold of me anytime they want to. And he said, I know. That's the point. You like working? I said, well, yeah. He said, how am I supposed to reach you and tell you have a fill-in shift? Okay, fine. So he bought me my first cell phone. And it was a little silver flip-up one about 3 inches long. And you could text on it and all. I never did. I charged it when it was election time, and I let it go after that. So once every 4 years it got used.
Yeah, I cannot stand texting from, with the letters, the numbers with the three that are all three. It's just crazy. So I went back to BlackBerry. I tried just a straight up Android phone with a virtual keyboard.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it. I gave it like 8 months, and then finally I said, that's it, back to BlackBerry with the full keyboard. So I have a Key 1.
No, this one here that I have, when you text on it.
It's virtual.
Well, if you go to, let's say I want to text somebody, it's a virtual keyboard, but when you hit that particular button, it switches to numbers and symbols.
Yeah,
So
no, I get it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that much
So-
I've got figured out.
Okay, so here's some really interesting news, actually, while we're talking about technology, and that is that we are very soon going to have our own Combat Zone app for both Androids and iPhone. So you'll be able to listen to us anywhere you are, live, or catch our shows as podcasts later on. Anytime you want, you can do it on the bus, you can do it on the subway if you have a signal. You can do it driving your car.
You just can't do it in Ottawa on the subway.
You won't be able to do it in Ottawa on the subway, or LRT for that matter, as I understand.
At least for another year.
At least for another year. But anyway, yeah, so pay attention, guys. We'll be making that announcement very soon. But we will have, you'll be able to get our show on an app on your device.
Now, I know they can't see it, but see this face? This is my surprised face.
This is your what face?
My surprised face.
Oh, yeah. Well, see, you
hadn't told me about this yet.
What do you think of that face transplant?
That's an amazing story. I was listening to terrestrial radio on the way driving around today, and Barry Dworkin was on with my former colleague Doug Snow, Rob Snow, and talking about how complicated it is and the kind of technology required to do this. I mean, this guy blew his face off with a shotgun, or he took a shotgun blast to the face, and they completely resculpted his face and then relayed this face transplant over and said it fit him like a glove. Now, I don't have the technical expertise to explain how they did it, but just the idea, because I've seen a couple of face transplants, they don't look so good. I mean, the face seems to have just kind of been set on there. But like anything else, this is an emerging technology. So it's like when you get a new car line out, you're going to have some wrinkles and I'm not trying to be funny here, but you're going to have issues to sort out. That's why people will tell you never buy the first year of any new car that comes out because they got to work the bugs out of it.
So this is what I want to know. I want to know if there's any possibility that if I have a face transplant, that I will have a face for television.
No.
And not just a face for radio.
No.
You don't think so?
No. I don't either. I've got the same chance.
You have a
do.
better face for television than I do, though.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean I have a face for television. It just means it's better than yours. But it's still not good enough.
If you
and no
so.
face transplant is going to fix that.
No?
No.
Okay. Anyway,
I
just thought that was really fascinating. So face transplants. Where was that? That was they were talking about. I was at the.
It was in Canada.
It was. I know it was in Canada. I was. Can I just say? So I was at the dentist this afternoon, but I was at my eye doctor this morning at the Ottawa Hospital at the eye clinic, and so I have special problems with my eyes. So I have to see these specialists every few months just to keep on top and monitor. And this was all they were talking about was. Which is funny because usually when I go, the doctors want to talk to me about politics, I want to talk about my eyesight, my medical conditions and stuff like that. And I sit down and they go, so are we going to ever get rid of that Kathleen Wynne? For years it was like that. I'd sit down, and what is happening at City Hall?
Tell you what,
another one.
you fix my eyes and I'll tell you what's going on at City Hall.
I know, it was... we used to joke around. I used to joke around with my wife about it. I go, in fact, when I came down this morning from my having my regular tests done and that, and she said, "So what did they want to talk about this morning? Politics?" I said, "No, we didn't talk about politics at all. It was quite unusual."
Well, actually, this took place in Montreal at the Maisonneuve Rosemont Hospital.
Okay.
I love Google.
Yeah, you're Googling away while we're at it. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, well, why not? That's what it's here for.
And Marin, if there's no help for me getting a television face, I hate to disappoint you, but I don't think that women can get a younger looking face from this procedure. But who knows? Maybe at some point in time in the future. So,
well, you never know. And if they replace the face, what else can they replace?
Okay, we're not going there, Nick.
I'm just saying. Just asking.
Okay, we're straying way afield here.
Let's pull this back on the tracks.
Yeah, pull us back. Let's get back to politics because we all know that everybody wants to pay attention to that. By the way, you can call us. We do have a toll-free number if you want to join in.
And we should give that out once in a while.
I'm going to give it out right now.
Oh, good.
844-415-2115. I'll even do it again. 844-415-2115.
Twice in the same segment?
Toll-free anywhere in North America.
We
Don't
keep
be shy.
that up. People are going to actually going to use it.
Yeah, they could.
Yeah.
We don't get a lot of calls, but that's okay because people like to listen to us.
Well, they giggle behind their hands, but yeah.
So we do get the odd call.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
the odd guest.
Yeah, we tried.
Walter was great last week, by the way. If you didn't catch last week's podcast live, go to the website, thecombatzone.ca, and listen to
last week's podcast.
Last week's podcast. Because,
Walter's a great guy.
Yeah,
and he's obviously very well knows his stuff. He's on more boards and organizations than you can shake a stick at.
And it's funny because it's when he sort of sauntered in here just before the show, sat down and took it over. I mean, he was just a natural. So Walter, I don't know if you're listening, but I was going to say we have to have you on, but my goodness gracious, I don't think there's going to be a place
that
for
and
Nick
he drank all my apple cider.
A little more apple cider, yeah.
Anyway, it was great having him, and we certainly enjoyed the conversation. We had a lot of fun with it, and we covered some pretty serious ground, too.
A little bit, yeah, we did.
Yep.
Nike.
Yep. Oh, we talked about Nike. We talked about the College of Trades. We talked about Merit.
Merit, Ontario. Merit, Canada. Yeah,
so there's he's a very, very busy man, runs a very successful general contracting and electrical contracting business. He's one of the biggest in the city, if not in Eastern Ontario. So he knows his stuff, and it's a lot of fun to spend time around people who are smarter than you are.
Okay, let's get back to business here.
Okay. We were talking about Justin Trudeau and his desire to surrender Canadian sovereignty to the United Nations. Because I think what's propelling Justin Trudeau, if there is any one thing, it's he wants a seat. He wants a permanent position at the UN. He's in love with the UN. He just thinks that, being a global citizen is more important than being a Canadian citizen, which flies directly in the face of what I think is proper for a prime minister of any country, never mind Canada by itself. Because I've always held the belief when it comes to nations that the highest organization a person can belong to, the largest one, is the nation state, because it's the one that you can hold accountable. Once you get beyond that, well, let's say as an example, just for the sake of discussion, this whole idea that the UN is going to run the whole show and have this so-called New World Order where, if you remember the Star Wars movie that featured the invasion of Naboo, the planet where the robots invaded, and that's where you first met Jar Jar Binks, one of my favorite characters of all time.
I have no idea what you're talking about, but I'm sure that there are people out there that do. So
that's what I'm hoping.
I will let you carry on.
Okay, right? So the Queen, the head of the government, Queen Nabidala, goes to the United Federation of Planets, or Star Wars version of that, because that's out of Star Trek. She goes to this massive council. And all the planets are represented by dignitaries, and they're sitting around in this huge auditorium, and she's pleading with them to come to the aid of of her planet because they're being invaded. Well, the country the planet is doing the invading objects and says, we don't know any of this is true. Let's launch a fact-finding mission. And in that scene is everything that's the UN summed up in a nutshell. You've got a bunch of tin pot dictators on equal footing with modern Western democracies. And they're allowed as much weight and as much say as these modern Western secular. You've got countries like Rwanda, well, not so much Rwanda, but let's take Qatar.
Or a country like Libya, when they were the head of the Human Rights
precisely
Committee.
Countries like that.
Yeah.
Okay, or Iran. okay, have as much weight at the UN as a country like Canada or the United States does. So when I look at that and I say, first of all, I don't want to be part of any organization that large, because even if 36 million of us all voted in a block against something, the UN represents, well, let's say 78 or 80% of the world's population. So let's say there's 10 million people represented, or 5 million people represented, or 5 billion people represented at the UN. What does 36 million mean? We don't have a say. Our voices are drowned out. And that is not democracy.
Right, but the thing about the United Nations, and I'm not going to defend the United Nations. I think that that the idea of the United Nations originally as an organization for the provision of collective security, and that was a vision of Winston Churchill.
Yes, it was.
And very largely also Franklin Roosevelt, although I think his vision differed in some significant ways from Winston Churchill. But the idea of an organization where different countries could come together and act as independent sovereign states collectively for the betterment of the world, okay, and particularly on issues pertaining to security, I don't think that's a bad thing. And so the way it was originally conceived, I think the United Nations was probably not a bad idea. It was a good organization. But that's not what it's about anymore.
Right.
So, but here's the thing about the United Nations that I tell people who are concerned about one world government as embodied by the United Nations, or that the United Nations becomes the one world government. There is no rule that says that we have to do anything that the UN decides. We decide whether we want to abide by the decisions of the UN, but that's still an internal sovereign decision. So the UN can vote on whatever it wants to vote for or against. We don't have to listen to it. So it doesn't have any kind of legislative or coercive powers over the individual constituent states. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't have a lot of time or patience for the United Nations. As far as I'm concerned, I see that there is a role for an international organization along the lines of what was envisioned originally by Churchill.
Right.
I don't think the United Nations plays that role. And so I personally would be very happy to see the United Nations go the way of the dodo bird, which, by the way, is extinct. And if the United Nations doesn't go that way, so be it. I would be the first person to vote for, in a referendum, I would be the first person to vote for withdrawing Canada from the United Nations the way it's presently constituted.
You'd have to beat me to the ballot box, because I'd vote for that.
You and I would have to fight
to see who gets cast that first ballot.
And in fact, we'd have to have a bylaw to regulate who gets to do the first ballot. I guess I don't know. Anyway, that's a given. But I think it's important to keep some perspective here as well, because I know people talk about Agenda 21 and all that stuff. It's important to understand that the United Nations has no power over us other than our acquiescence in what the United Nations wants to do.
Well, this is the problem, because our present leadership is more than happy to allow the UN to come in here and tell us how to run our affairs. It's like when we have a UN envoy come to Canada and tell us that gives us a verbal spanking about how we treat our natives, but never says a word to the Sudan or to Yemen or to Libya or to Iran about their human rights abuses. The hypocrisy just blows my mind.
Right, sure. And they say that, and we ignore them, and which just begs the question, why do we even bother with this organization?
That's as far as I'm concerned, when the UN plane lands at Pearson, the Mounties should meet them, give them a sandwich and a coffee, put them right back on the plane, and send them right back to New York or Brussels. That's what I'd do with them in a heartbeat. You're not welcome. Goodbye.
Well, I don't disagree with you, Nick. All I'm arguing for is perspective. That's all.
You're right about the idea of having an organization where countries can sort their differences out without having to draw the sword. Nobody argues with that. That's what Churchill wanted.
Or in the event that there are aggressor nations, that there is some kind of a body where countries can come together collectively and put a stop to the aggression.
I would prefer to see an organization, I'm just shooting off the top of my head here, the United Nations of Democratic States.
Right, and this idea has been floated.
Yeah.
I think it's a wonderful idea. I don't think that anyone is working on it seriously. I'd love to work on that project seriously.
Yeah, me too. Because I would set the standard as you have to have a functioning judiciary, free and open elections, and there's certain, in other words, there'd be certain benchmarks for belonging. You just couldn't apply and say, "Oh, by the way, we're Eastern Antarctica, and we want to be a member of your club." Well, do you meet the standard? If you don't, sorry, you have to bring yourself up to that standard. Then we'll talk about letting you in. But until then, don't bother us.
Right. Now, in fairness, there are some organizations that come close to meeting those requirements. The G20 is largely that. G7 on a different scale.
Smaller scale, yeah.
Although, for a number of years it was the G8 because
They
started out
included
as
Russia.
the G7 and then they brought the Russians in, but now the Russians are out, so it's back to being the G7 again. So, and there are a couple of different organizations. There are a handful of, but none that really fits the role that we're talking about.
Right.
That's sort of a United Nations of democratic countries.
Well, look at NATO. If they took NATO, which is primarily made up of Western nations, France isn't a member, Turkey is, but I would revoke their membership in a heartbeat because of recent events. But if you took that group of countries that make up NATO and said, look, that's the military aspect, mutual defense. Let's talk about trade. Let's talk about other affairs that don't necessarily require military action. Like, just as an example, settling the dispute between Denmark and Canada about that tiny little rock called Hans Island up between Greenland and Ellesmere Island near the top of the channel. Okay, just to give people some idea where that is. That's way the heck up north. It's like 500 or 600 miles from the pole. So the way, and actually it's kind of a standing joke that the war between Canada and Denmark is fought with Canadian whiskey and Danish schnapps. Because one year the Canadian Navy goes up, plants the flag, and leaves a bottle of scotch behind, or Canadian whiskey behind, and the Danes come up, take down that flag, grab the bottle of whiskey, and put up their flag and leave a bottle of schnapps behind. And that cycle repeats because each is claiming territories. Now the Danes want it because it's not just the 2 square miles of rock sticking above the water they're after. They want the territorial water around it as well, which greatly increases the chances of finding natural resources under that rock. Because there's not a tree on the place. It's just a bald, naked rock. It's a perfect place to send people like Omar Khadr, as an example.
Okay, and with that, we're going to take our last break. Bottom of the hour.
Is it already?
I can't believe it.
Oh, my good Lord.
Okay, I'm Joe, he's Nick. Welcome back in the combat zone, and we are in the home stretch, the last 30 minutes. The get up, what do they call it? Oh, the 7th inning stretch, right? We have to come up with our own name for that. I think I said that in a previous show. We have to come up with our own term for the 7th inning stretch and our own song. Maybe somebody out there can write a song for us and record it. Hey, your kids are pretty good with music there, Nick.
Let me run that past our resident local genius, our musical genius, my daughter Andrea, and see what we can come up with. Who knows?
Who knows? Maybe we could
I've penned the odd parody in my time. Maybe
You've
come up with
penned
something.
the odd parody.
Yes.
How poetic of you.
I know. Hey, listen. When you got the flair,
How
man.
lyrical.
It was one of my favorites was about. You remember Sven Robinson? You remember him? For those who don't, he was the first openly gay minister, openly gay MP in the House of Commons.
Right.
And he was from the Sunshine Coast,
Yes.
out of BC.
The left coast.
That's right. Well,
The far left coast.
the very far left coast. It's hard to get more lefter than where he was from, and stay dry. Anyway, he did some stuff like he wanted to raise money for a particular cause, so he had a picture of himself taken standing on some rocks on the ocean, naked, and then they put seashells over his body. And for $5, you could remove a shell, or for $5, you could put one back. He ended up covered head to toe with seashells because nobody wanted to see what was
Because
under
I was just going to say, there is an image that I don't need.
That's right.
I don't need that stuff
And a
in
lot
my
of
head.
people agreed with you. And I don't know how much money he raised, but he was also caught on videotape at an auction house, and he stole a $65,000 ring for his partner.
Yes.
And when the RCMP went to arrest him, he turned himself in, and he did the whole crocodile tear thing. And he-
PTSD or something like that. I was bullied or something like
no,
that. I don't know.
that PTSD wasn't a thing then.
No, yeah, you're right. I'm making light of it, but
Yeah.
he did, give the whole I'm mentally ill
Yeah.
type of argument.
so-
and that, yeah,
Everybody forgave him. They cut him all this slack. And then in his last 10 days, he decided he was going to leave politics. He went on a junket to learn about the democratic process by going to Scotland. So I congealed all that into a song called The Shiny Ring. Okay, and it was set to the tune of She's Coming Round the Mountain. And to this day, my kids groan every time I grab the guitar and I play it. Because they just, not that again. But it was so popular when I was on the air, I would play this song. I had a local car dealer. The owner of a car dealership was driving and listening to the radio at the time. He nearly drove off the road. He was laughing so hard. So he called the station and asked me to record it on a CD for him and give it to him so he could play it at his leisure. And on top of that, a Boy Scout troop here somewhere in Ottawa included it in one of their campfire songbooks. So we had some fun with that.
Okay, so where are we going with this? If anyone would like for Nick to re-record, we want a remastered version of that. No, and now you've got my curiosity is piqued, as is the curiosity of all of our listeners, Nick.
Oh, my God.
We are going to have to, you're going to have to reproduce that. You're going to have to reperform it. So you don't have to do it like here while we're all here. You can do it, quietly, in the bathroom or something like that, or in the I don't know. Lock the doors, pull the blinds down, but keep it clean. Keep it clean.
Oh yeah, it's totally clean. It's totally harmless. It's just funny. And the other one I got a lot of response to was it was on the tip of my tongue a second ago. Not Dalton McGuinty is the premier set to this Ghost Riders, but the one it was set to the tune of Gordon Lightfoot's Did She Mention My Name? About the Gomery Commission. And that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So we had probably about half a dozen of them that we did.
Hey, speaking of the Gomery Commission, we should have Alan Cutler come on.
Hey, there's an idea. I haven't talked to Alan in ages.
Alan Cutler is he's a sharp guy.
He sure is. And it was really unfortunate that he wasn't elected when he stood for the Conservatives. But the Liberals brought out everything they could find and just hammered him. So it would be fun. He's now he has a thing going on where he promotes whistleblowers.
Right. He's a consultant.
Yeah, true, exactly.
Right.
And I've interviewed him while I was still on terrestrial radio, and he brought in one guy who was talking about security at our seaports and how bad it is. And I doubt it's gotten any better. So that was interesting. There was a few other ones that I can't quite recall, but
okay,
it'd be good to have me back again.
Too much inside baseball stuff. We'll have to talk about this stuff off air.
Yeah, fair enough.
Okay.
Fair enough.
So let's spend. We're running out of time here. Time has just gone flying by. We're having too much fun, and we're not gonna. I was gonna make a joke about apple cider, but I can see that. I can see that apple cider has dominated our chat room tonight. So comments about apple cider.
Really?
And, well, no, dominated is probably too strong a word to use. Doug Ford and the Ford government in Ontario, they decide they're going to cut city council in Toronto from 47 to 25 councillors, correct?
Yep, that is correct.
Somebody takes them to court, and the argument is that the decision by the Ford government to do this violates the Charter of Rights and Freedoms because, I don't know, some argument about
they've
equal
limited the
representation or
expression,
something like that.
the right to expression, freedom of expression by the candidates.
Right. Okay,
Because
so
of the-
something ridiculous argument like that.
Right.
And the judge agrees. And the
Surprise,
judge agrees,
surprise.
and so the judge says to the government of Ontario, sorry, you can't do this. So the Ford government now has recalled the legislature, and they are invoking the famous or infamous Section 33 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms here in Canada. Yes, the notwithstanding clause. Now, for those of you out there who don't know what the notwithstanding clause is, and when I say that don't know, I'm referring to Canadians as well who don't really understand how the notwithstanding clause works. So let me explain it. The notwithstanding clause is Section 33 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. What it does is it allows for the elected legislature to suspend the application of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms as it impacts or with regard to a particular piece of legislation for 5 years. It can be renewed every 5 years, but it expires after 5 years.
There's
so
a
you
sunset
have to
clause,
renew it.
yes.
Okay. Now, the Ford government is not the first government to invoke the notwithstanding clause. And the notwithstanding clause, by the way, ironically, was brought in 1982 with the adoption of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms by Pierre Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's father, who was Prime Minister at the time. So it's actually a liberal policy or a liberal...
It was a concession to get Quebec on board.
No, because Quebec, in fact, interestingly enough, no, I'm glad you raised that question because Quebec still didn't sign the Constitution at that time. What it was the Charter of Rights. Everybody understood that the big argument about adopting the Charter at the time, Nick, was that prior to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms being entrenched in the Constitution, the legislature had the final say over rights and freedoms. So it was a legislative issue.
Right.
Okay, the courts could rule, but the legislature ultimately had the say. Okay? And so there was a very real sense that by having the Charter of Rights and Freedoms entrenched in the Constitution, that now what was happening was that you were making unelected judges more powerful or have the final say over policy, etc., and taking that out of the hands of the legislature. That was a very big impasse. And so what the compromise was that, okay, we're going to create this notwithstanding clause inserted into the Charter of Rights and Freedoms so that the legislative branch still had the ultimate power over the judiciary on these
as
types
it
of
should
issues.
have.
As it should be. And Quebec, that wasn't a concession to Quebec. And in fact, Quebec didn't sign the Constitution, which was really ironic because the first province to use the notwithstanding clause, and they've used it repeatedly, they've renewed it repeatedly, was the province of Quebec. So all of these people that say, oh, Quebec didn't sign the Constitution, we have to have them sign the Constitution. My personal view, I know we're getting into the weeds here again.
Right.
But my personal view is, who cares whether they signed it or not? They used the new Constitution when they invoked the notwithstanding clause to protect Bill 101 to overrule the Quebec Court of Appeal, and Bill 101 was a language law.
Yes.
So there was a case in Quebec where people took the government to Quebec to court and said the language laws that you've passed are unconstitutional because they violate the freedoms, whatever it was, in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And the Quebec Court of Appeal also agreed with that point of view. And so the Quebec government overruled, or the Quebec government invoked the notwithstanding clause to protect that particular piece of legislation. So that's what the government in Ontario is doing, a sort of a roundabout way.
Now the thing about this this whole thing, first of all, I was delighted when I saw it when I saw Doug do this.
Yeah, I'm not sure I am, but we'll get into that.
Okay, the reason I was delighted was because, as Doug pointed out, this particular judge was appointed by one man. I was elected by 2.3 million Ontarians. I have to face them in 4 years. He doesn't. So he shouldn't have the last word on this. So philosophically, I get that.
Yeah.
And I think most people do.
I first of all, I'm a fan of the notwithstanding. I'm not a fan of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I don't think we needed to entrench a Charter of Rights and Freedoms in our quote-unquote Constitution.
Well, we already had all the rights entrenched.
And you're right. We have a Constitution. We also had the Bill of Rights. And in our system, a lot of these documents become constitutional even though they're not formally part of our Constitution. So I had no problem before. I don't think we needed to have the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I think it created a whole mess in a lot of areas. That's for a different show.
Right.
Once we have the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, though, I'm a fan of the notwithstanding clause, and I would have invoked it if I had had the opportunity on many occasions other than just this. Why I'm not sure that this is the right thing to do at this stage is because I think that the preponderance of opinion is that this particular judge's ruling was so egregious that it would for sure be overturned by the Court of Appeal. And I think there were probably legal things that could have been done to stay the application of the decision pending an appeal, which I'm sure they would have gotten, and I'm sure they would have won. And even if it went to the Supreme Court, I'm sure they would have won. I think I probably would have argued that they should litigate this as opposed to simply invoking the notwithstanding clause and letting it dangle out there as if it's, somehow or other a reasonable, valid legal decision by this judge.
Let me make a couple of points here. 3, in fact. Number one, I think that by imposing the notwithstanding clause, he gets to carry through with his cutting of the city of Toronto council in half. And for those who are saying, well, why does he want to act? Why does he continue to act like he's the mayor of Toronto? Why is this his bailiwick? First of all, municipalities are creatures of the province under our Constitution. It's it's at the pleasure of the province when a new municipality comes into being. So, in kind of an abstract way, he is the mayor of Toronto. And the other thing to keep in mind is that Toronto, whether people who don't live there or not like it, it is the heartbeat of our economy, both in the province and to a lesser degree, the nation as a whole. And when Toronto doesn't work, it affects everybody because you have to have a place where business can thrive, where you can get things done, have the infrastructure built in order to promote business that isn't being done now. With 47, you got too many cooks and not enough stew. So by cutting the councillors in half, now they have to work together. It's a lot easier to convince 25 people that this direction is the right one to go than it is 47. It's like in Canada, you have this amazing ability to have 100 people in the room and have 100 different opinions about things. So he's making it easier for these things to get done. But as well, there's a downside or a dark side I see here. That while I applaud Doug for doing this when it comes to getting his legislative agenda moving forward by applying Section 33, or the notwithstanding clause, in this case, to override what I consider to be an activist judge who made this terrible decision. That's fine when it's in the hands of somebody that, is doing the right thing. Okay? But no government lasts forever. And if he sets a precedence, what happens now, 10 years, 5 years, who knows how long down the road, when those we just booted out come back into power? Because they will. And they'll be able to use it. And who's going to be able to say, no, you can't do that? Because we just let our guy do it. So when they go in and they repeal a piece of legislation, or a court decision comes down that they don't like because they can't get their progressive agenda advanced under that ruling, they'll just bring up the notwithstanding clause and get it done anyway. And that's the other side of the knife. And that's what people have to keep in mind. So I'm applauding him for using it, but it's like a nuclear hand grenade. Small, but very powerful, so be careful when you pull the pin.
Well, that the point you're making is a very valid point. And I'm always saying to politicians, be careful of the precedent that you're setting.
That's what I'm saying too.
Always ask yourself, is this something that I want my opponents to be able to use against me when inevitably they're going to have the power to use it? So I think that you're raising a very good point. I do think that that's something that we ought to be concerned about. But look, the notwithstanding clause is there for a reason, and I wish that politicians would use it for that reason more often. I'm really, really not that concerned about the Liberals using the notwithstanding clause to suspend the application of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms as it pertains to any particular piece of legislation. I don't believe, I can't fathom what piece of legislation the Liberals would bring in, or the left would bring in, to speak more broadly, that I would want to use the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to challenge in the first place. I suppose you could argue that that they might want to curtail free speech. We haven't really talked about free speech. We touched on it very, very peripherally earlier on in the show. I don't know. I don't really know what the danger really here would be. So I would use it. I would use it a lot more freely than it has been used in the past. In order to rein in what really are, activist left-wing judges who are usurping the role of Parliament. Look, here's a very good example, Nick. A few years ago, the Supreme Court decision to legalize euthanasia in Canada. I mean, we already had, it was virtually an identical case to this back in 1992, the Rodriguez case, where the Supreme Court ruled that it was indeed constitutional to include euthanasia in the criminal code, that it was illegal to perform euthanasia in Canada. Fast forward 92, 2002, 2012, so 23 years, they bring almost an identical case. I don't know why the Supreme Court, why any of the courts heard it, because this had already been adjudicated. And you could bring a case that's been adjudicated to the courts if there's a material change in circumstance. But what was the change in circumstance? The law hadn't changed, and the basic facts that were brought before the court hadn't changed. So what had changed? Public opinion had changed. And in fact, that's what the court relied on when they overturned their previous decision and set this new precedent, said that euthanasia now is legal. And their argument was, well, public opinion has changed. Now, I remember you and I talked about this when you were doing your terrestrial show, and I was a guest. I'm not going to quibble whether or not public opinion has changed about it, because I think public opinion has changed. But the place where public opinion has sway is not in the judicial branch, it's in the legislative branch. So if in fact it's true that public opinion has changed to the point where the law ought to be changed, then that has to play out as part of the legislative process, not the judicial process. So this was a perfect, clear example of the courts usurping the role of the legislative branch. And I think that's a profoundly dangerous thing constitutionally. So in a case like that, I would, in an instant, I would invoke the notwithstanding clause.
Well, I think that because I'm not going to argue with that. I think you're quite right. I guess my fear is, and maybe this is why, perhaps I'm a little more cautious about using it than you are, and I don't mean to trivialize your point of view, but because the left has an attitude that can be summed up in this sentence: when they can't legislate, they litigate. Look at there's 10 lawsuits now against the Ford government, who hasn't been in office like 6 months yet, and the latest being Greenpeace over the cancellation of the cap and trade. Any reasonable judge should look at them and say, this is a political issue. What are you doing in my courtroom? If you can't convince people to see things your way, then tough luck. But this is not the role of the court to decide whether or not the government has the right to cancel the cap and trade system.
Right, but this would be a perfect example of when I do want the notwithstanding clause to be applied. So remember, the notwithstanding clause is all about taking what the judges have taken onto themselves, the power to make these legislative decisions through the judiciary, and taking that power away from them and saying, no, you may have made that decision, but ultimately it's a legislative decision, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to do what we're going to do anyway, notwithstanding, this is what we call it, the notwithstanding clause, notwithstanding your decision. So in this case, the more it's used, the better, because what the liberals or what the left would do is exactly what you're saying. They would prefer to litigate as opposed to legislate, because they can't legislate some of this stuff. So what I'm saying is, great, let them litigate, and when they litigate, then we just legislate ignoring what the litigation has said. It's a crazy system, okay?
It is.
And I understand when people, they get confused, and especially, if you're not Canadian, if you're American, you're thinking, what in heaven's name is a notwithstanding clause? You have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but you can suspend it by simply voting in the legislature. I think it's crazy, but there it is.
It is what it is.
It's
the
a
old
tool
saying
to be
goes.
used, and I would, if I was in charge, I think I would use it a lot more, and I think conservatives should be a lot bolder in using it.
Well, Doug Ford has made it plain that this will not be the only time he uses it. So maybe he already has in mind the kind of things that you're talking about. Because how else, coming full circle, how else do you defeat these activist judges? Because from what I understand, he can appoint justices of the peace, but I don't know about what we call the lower courts, the Court of Appeal of Ontario and some of the other lower courts. Those federal or provincial appointed?
Yeah, generally speaking, judges are federally appointed.
Okay, so Trudeau's up there going, I like you because you're a liberal, I like you. He's appointing his type of judge onto the bench, and the only way to overcome that is by dropping that hammer.
Right. It's a very big problem, and there are things that can be done about it, but you and I are not going to solve this tonight.
No, we're not, because guess what?
Are we running out of time?
We have about 2 minutes left.
About 2 minutes left. What can we talk about for 2 minutes?
Where do I
Send us
begin?
your comments.
Yeah, you can do that. Follow us on Twitter. You can follow me at nvandergrat, VANDERGRAGT. Now, to say it, forget the last G. Otherwise, you'll hurt yourself.
Yeah, we're gonna get Nick set up so he's gonna have some follow me buttons on Facebook and all this stuff, so people are gonna be able to get this stuff too. And we'll actually include some his Twitter button on the website too. I think that's probably not a bad idea, Nick.
And it's okay for you for them to follow you too.
They absolutely can.
Yep.
Joseph Benamy. At Joseph Benamy, JOSEPHBENAMI.
See, now for a long time it took me, when I was writing out your name, was it an E or an A? And I could never remember.
Right.
I know now.
There is a hyphen in there, but not in my Twitter handle or my LinkedIn handle.
Yeah, it's between the B and the E, right?
Right.
Yeah, so I thought.
No, between the... Don't get me going. Okay, send us your comments. Comments at thecombatzone.ca. That's comments at thecombatzone.ca. I feel a little bit like Bill O'Reilly there. You know, name and... What is it you say? Name and town, if you want to opine. Now, do you know what opine means? Not a lot of people know what opine means.
Opine means to offer an opinion.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I
That's
do.
the root word.
Nick.
That's the root word of opine.
I wasn't suggesting...
Or of opinion.
I was not suggesting, Nick, that you did not know that.
That's okay, because most people would suggest I don't know that.
Okay. All right. Well, it's been a blast, guys. Let's... tell people about the Combat Zone and watch for our announcement when we get our app up and running. And we'll catch you next week for the Combat Zone.